The first ships appeared above Earth's atmosphere on a Tuesday morning, silent as death itself. They came not as conquerors, but as beggars, their massive vessels scarred and broken, leaking atmosphere into the void. The Kethmori Confederation had traveled 3,000 light-years to reach humanity's doorstep, and they arrived with empty hands and desperate hearts. Ambassador Veltar stood in the center of the United Nations Assembly Hall, his tall, thin frame trembling despite his efforts to appear composed. His people were beautiful in an alien way, with pale blue skin that seemed to glow from within and large, dark eyes that held depths of ancient sadness. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 14 dying worlds. "We come to you not as equals," Veltar began, his words translated by devices that made his voice sound hollow and distant. "We come as a dying people seeking salvation from those who still remember how to fight. Our civilization spans 14 star systems, or it did before they came. Now we hold only 3 worlds, and even those will not last another year." The human delegates sat in uncomfortable silence as holographic displays filled the air above them. Images of beautiful worlds with crystal cities and floating gardens gave way to scenes of horror that made even hardened diplomats look away. Entire continents stripped of life, leaving behind only gray, pulsing masses that writhed across dead landscapes. They called themselves the Devourers, Veltar continued, his hands shaking as he manipulated the controls. "We do not know where they came from. They simply appeared at the edge of our space 5 years ago and began to consume, not just life, but the very essence of what makes a world capable of supporting it. They leave nothing behind but themselves, growing larger and stronger with each world they destroy." Secretary General Martinez leaned forward in her chair. "And your own military forces? Surely a civilization as advanced as yours must have some way to defend itself." Veltar's expression grew even more pained. "We had no military, Secretary General. Our people evolved beyond the need for warfare over 3,000 years ago. We had police, yes, and ships for exploration and trade, but nothing designed for combat. When the Devourers came, we tried to negotiate. We offered them resources, technology, even uninhabited worlds. They consumed our negotiators along with everything else." The Russian representative, General Petrov, crossed his arms. "So you want us to fight your war for you?" "Yes," Veltar said without hesitation. "We know of humanity's reputation in this region of space. You are young, barely 500 years since your first wars among the stars, but you have never stopped fighting. Pirates, alien raiders, territorial disputes with the Centauri colonies. Where other species seek peace, humans seem to thrive in conflict." Ambassador Chen from the Pacific Federation raised an eyebrow. "That's hardly a compliment." "It is the highest compliment we can offer," Veltar replied. "We offer you everything we have. Our technology, our star charts, our remaining resources. We will serve as vassals to your empire if that is what it takes. But please help us stop them before they turn their attention to other species, before they come for you." The ambassador activated another display, and the assembly hall filled with the sound of screaming. Not just voices, but entire worlds crying out in agony as they died. Children who would never grow up, artists whose songs would never be heard again, scientists whose discoveries would be lost forever. The sound went on for nearly 5 minutes before Veltar finally turned it off. "This is the last transmission from Kethnala, our most populous world," he said quietly. 47 billion souls reduced to nutrients for creatures that know nothing but hunger. They died calling for help that never came, begging for mercy from beings that do not understand the concept. President Williams of the North American Union stood slowly. "What exactly are these Devourers? Are they a species, a plague, some kind of weapon?" "We believe they are biological," Veltar answered. "Living creatures, but unlike anything in our databases. They range in size from small craft to vessels larger than moons. They reproduce by consuming organic matter and converting it into more of themselves. They seem to operate as a hive mind, coordinated across vast distances with perfect efficiency." "And they're intelligent?" asked Dr. Yamamoto, the chief science advisor. "Highly intelligent," Veltar confirmed. "They adapt their tactics, learn from each encounter, and show strategic planning that spans decades. But they show no interest in communication, no desire for anything except consumption. We tried everything, offered them anything they might want, but they only respond to the presence of life by trying to devour it." The hall fell silent as the implications sank in. Finally, General Morrison of the European Defense Force spoke up. "You said 3 worlds remain. How long do we have?" Based on their current rate of advance, perhaps 8 to 10 months before they finish with our remaining colonies, Veltar replied. After that, they will look for new hunting grounds. Your nearest colony is only 40 light years from our space. Secretary General Martinez stood and looked around the assembly. We need time to consider this request. The Security Council will meet an emergency session. Veltar bowed deeply. We understand. But please remember that while you deliberate, more of my people die. We have refugee ships carrying the last survivors of 11 worlds. They look to the stars each night and pray that someone, somewhere, still believes that innocent life is worth protecting. As the ambassador left the hall, followed by his small retinue of survivors, the human delegates sat in stunned silence. They had been asked to fight a war against an enemy they had never seen, to protect a people they barely knew, against creatures that seemed unstoppable. But what troubled many of them most was not the request itself, but the look in Veltar's eyes when he spoke of humanity's reputation for warfare. There had been hope there, yes, but also something else, something that suggested the Keth Mori understood exactly what kind of force they were asking to unleash upon the galaxy. They had asked for mercy, but they had come to the one species in known space that had never learned to show it to those who threatened the innocent. The Keth Mori were about to discover what happened when a young, aggressive species decided that genocide would not be tolerated in their corner of the universe. The delegates filed out of the assembly hall, each carrying the weight of a decision that would echo across the stars. They did not yet know that their choice had already been made the moment those recordings began to play. Humanity had heard the screams of the dying, and they would not forget them. The emergency session of the United Nations Security Council lasted 18 hours. Representatives from every major human power sat around the polished table, while holographic displays showed star charts, tactical analyses, and the faces of refugees who had fled across impossible distances to beg for help. Secretary General Martinez rubbed her tired eyes as the debate raged on. The economic advisors spoke of opportunity. The Keth Mori offered technology that could advance human civilization by centuries: anti-gravity systems, faster-than-light communications, energy sources that made fusion power look primitive. The potential benefits were staggering. We could end energy scarcity, Dr. Hassan from the Science Council argued. Their gravitational manipulation technology alone could revolutionize space travel. We're talking about the advancement of human civilization by hundreds of years in exchange for military assistance. Ambassador Reynolds from the Diplomatic Corps shook his head. We need to consider the long-term implications. If we intervene in this conflict, we announce ourselves as a military power to the entire galaxy. Every alien species will know that humanity is willing to fight wars for others. That makes us either valuable allies or dangerous enemies. General Morrison leaned back in his chair. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. Right now we're seen as newcomers, barely worth notice. If we help the Keth Mori, we establish ourselves as a force to be respected. Or feared, added Admiral Chen quietly. She had been studying the tactical data for hours, and what she saw there troubled her more than the political implications. I've been reviewing our capabilities against what we know of these devourers. Our weapons are designed to fight ships with hulls, shields, and crews. These things are biological. They adapt, they regenerate, they learn from each encounter. President Williams pulled up the recordings from the Keth Mori presentation. Let's watch this again, she said grimly. All of it. For the next hour, the council watched in silence as entire worlds died. They saw the devourers in action. Massive organic ships that moved like living creatures, spawning smaller vessels that swarmed across planetary surfaces. The creatures consumed everything, converting organic matter into more of themselves with horrifying efficiency. But it was the smaller details that affected the humans most deeply. A Keth Mori child, no more than 5 years old by their standards, hiding in the ruins of a city while the sounds of consumption grew closer. An elderly artist broadcasting one final song before the transmission cut to static. A scientist uploading his life's work to the galactic database, even as the laboratory around him was dissolved by acidic secretions. General Petrov was the first to speak when the recordings ended. This is not war, he said quietly. This is extermination. These creatures do not conquer, they do not enslave, they do not even seem to hate. They simply consume everything living and move on. Which brings us to the real question, said Admiral Chen. Can we actually stop them? The Keth Mori were a spacefaring civilization for over 5,000 years. They had energy weapons, defensive shields, and the industrial capacity of 14 star systems. The Devourers destroyed all of it in less than 5 years. Dr. Yamamoto pulled up technical specifications on his tablet. Their approach was too civilized, he said after a moment. The Kethmori tried to fight a clean war. They targeted what they thought were command ships, attempted to disable rather than destroy, and always left room for negotiation. They fought like people who had never encountered an enemy that couldn't be reasoned with. And we would fight differently? Secretary General Martinez asked. Admiral Chen's smile was cold. Very differently. Humans don't fight clean wars against existential threats. We fight to win, and we fight dirty when we have to. If these things are biological, we have weapons designed specifically to destroy biological organisms. Viral bombs, genetic targeting systems, chemical weapons that the Kethmori probably consider too barbaric to use. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Finally, President Chen of the Asian Coalition spoke up. Are we seriously considering using biological weapons against an entire species? We're considering using every weapon we have against creatures that are committing genocide, Admiral Chen replied. These things have killed trillions of intelligent beings. They show no mercy, no restraint, and no interest in coexistence. Why should we show them consideration they refuse to give others? General Morrison nodded slowly. The Kethmori came to us because they know our reputation. We're the species that fought 3 world wars before we reached the stars. We're the ones who settled our differences with the Centauri colonies by blockading their trade routes until they agreed to arbitration. Other species negotiate. Humans dominate. Ambassador Reynolds looked uncomfortable. That's exactly the reputation we've been trying to move away from. If we intervene with the level of force you're suggesting, every species in the galaxy will see us as warmongers. Good, said Admiral Chen bluntly. Let them think twice before they threaten human interests or commit genocide in our neighborhood. The Kethmori tried to be civilized, and look where it got them. Sometimes the only way to stop a monster is to be a bigger monster. Secretary General Martinez called for a recess, and the delegates broke into smaller groups to discuss the decision privately. In the corridors outside the chamber, conversations were intense and heated. Some argued for caution, others for decisive action, but everyone understood that they were deciding more than just military intervention. They were choosing what kind of species humanity would become in the eyes of the galaxy. When the session resumed, Admiral Chen was called to present the military's assessment. She stood before the assembly with a confidence that suggested the decision had already been made in her mind. The Joint Chiefs have reviewed all available data, she began. We believe we can stop the Devourers, but not with conventional tactics. These creatures adapt to whatever they encounter, so we need to hit them with everything at once. No mercy, no hesitation, and no chance for them to learn from their mistakes. She activated a tactical display showing human fleet deployments. We recommend immediate deployment of the 4th and 7th battle groups, along with our experimental bioweapons division. The plan is simple. We locate their main concentration, we sterilize everything in a 50 light-year radius, and we hunt down any survivors with extreme prejudice. President Williams raised a hand. You're talking about xenocide, Admiral. The complete extinction of an alien species. I'm talking about stopping genocide, Admiral Chen replied without hesitation. These creatures have proven they cannot coexist with other forms of life. They've had 5 years to show some capacity for restraint or negotiation. Instead, they've killed everything they've encountered. At what point do we stop treating them as a species to be protected and start treating them as a plague to be eradicated? The vote, when it finally came, was closer than anyone expected. 12 votes in favor of military intervention, 8 against, and 3 abstentions. It was enough to authorize the mission, but the narrow margin spoke to the weight of the decision. As the delegates filed out of the chamber, Secretary General Martinez remained behind with Admiral Chen. I hope you understand what you've just committed us to, she said quietly. If this goes wrong, if we fail to stop these creatures, humanity will be marked as a threat by every species in the galaxy. Admiral Chen gathered her files and stood to leave. Madam Secretary, with respect, I think you're missing the point. The Kethmori didn't come to us despite our reputation for violence. They came to us because of it. They wanted mercy from the universe, but they asked for help from the one species that understands sometimes mercy has to be carved out of the darkness with blood and fire. She paused at the door. The galaxy is about to learn something that humans figured out a long time ago. Sometimes the only way to protect the innocent is to become something the guilty fear more than death itself. Within hours, orders went out to every human fleet in space. The message was simple and direct. Prepare for total war against an enemy that showed no mercy, expected none in return, and had just made the mistake of attracting the attention of the one species in the galaxy that was very, very good at making things extinct. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kethmori system, with all the subtlety of a hammer blow. 37 ships of the line, bristling with weapons that most civilized species considered too destructive to deploy, hung in the darkness like predators scenting blood. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of the dreadnought Retribution and watched the tactical displays with cold satisfaction. "Sensor sweep complete, Admiral," reported Commander Martinez. "We have confirmation of Devourer presence throughout the system. They're in the process of consuming the 12th world," Chen nodded grimly. The displays showed exactly what the Kethmori had described, but seeing it firsthand was different. The creatures were not ships in any conventional sense. They were living beings, some the size of cruisers, others massive as small moons. Their surfaces pulsed with organic patterns, and they moved through space with a fluid grace that no artificial vessel could match. "Jesus Christ," whispered Lieutenant Torres at the sensor station. "Look at the planet. Where once there had been a world of blue oceans and green continents, now there was only gray. Massive tendrils extended from the largest devourer creatures down to the planet's surface, pumping the converted biomass up into their bodies like grotesque feeding tubes. The entire planet was being digested alive. How many are there?" Chen asked. "Roughly 300 individual organisms," Martinez replied. "The largest are approximately 8 kilometers in length. But Admiral, they're spawning smaller units continuously. Our count keeps going up." Chen opened a channel to the rest of the fleet. "All ships, this is Admiral Chen. You can see what we're dealing with. These things have killed trillions of innocent beings, and they're not going to stop unless we make them stop. Today we find out if humanity has what it takes to be the galaxy's immune system." The first engagement was a disaster. Human ships opened fire with plasma cannons, railguns, and fusion missiles. The weapons that had proven devastating against conventional targets barely scratched the Devourer's adaptive hulls. Worse, the creatures learned from each attack, their biological systems rapidly developing resistance to whatever had just been used against them. "Admiral, they're adapting to our fire," reported Captain Santos. From the cruiser Righteous Fury, plasma, bursts that burned through their hull 5 minutes ago are barely scorching them now. Chen watched as 3 of the larger Devourers turned their attention to the human fleet. They moved with terrifying speed, spawning clouds of smaller organisms that swarmed toward the human ships like antibodies responding to an infection. "All ships, fall back to defensive positions," Chen ordered. "Activate the bioweapons protocols." The retreat was orderly but costly. The destroyer Vigilant took direct hits from organic projectiles that ate through its armor like acid. The crew managed to abandon ship before the hull was completely dissolved, but watching their vessel consumed before their eyes drove home the alien horror they faced. "Analysis complete, Admiral," Dr. Vance reported from the science station. She was the fleet's chief xenobiologist, a woman who had spent her career studying alien life forms. Now she looked like she had seen something that challenged her understanding of what life could become. "These creatures are unlike anything in our databases. They're not just adaptive, they're evolutionary accelerated. They can modify their genetics in real time." "Weaknesses?" Chen asked bluntly. "They're still biological," Vance replied. "They need time to adapt, even if it's only minutes. And they seem to share information through some kind of biological network. If we can disrupt that network, we might be able to prevent them from learning from our attacks." Chen smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Doctor, prepare the viral packages. Target their communication pathways first, then their regeneration systems. If these things want to play evolution, let's show them what humans learned about biological warfare." The second wave of attacks was different. Instead of conventional weapons, the human ships deployed microscopic drones carrying engineered viruses. The viruses were designed not to kill immediately, but to disrupt the Devourer's ability to share information. For the first time since the engagement began, the creature's movements became uncoordinated. "It's working," Martinez reported with excitement. "They're losing synchronization. Some of them are attacking their own spawn." Chen nodded and opened the fleet channel again. Phase 2. Deploy the pain amplifiers. This time the humans launched weapons that the Kethmori would have found horrifying. Biological agents designed not to kill quickly, but to cause maximum suffering while keeping the target alive as long as possible. The idea was simple. If the devourers operated as a hive mind, then causing unbearable pain to some of them would disrupt the entire network. The effect was immediate and terrifying. The infected devourers began to writhe in obvious agony, their movements becoming erratic and desperate. Their screams, when they came, were broadcast across subspace frequencies that made every human in the fleet feel sick. But it worked. The creatures' coordination collapsed completely as their shared consciousness was flooded with pain signals. "My God," whispered Dr. Vance. "Admiral, they're trying to amputate infected sections of themselves. They're cutting away parts of their own bodies to escape the pain." Chen's expression never changed. "Launch the termination packages. End this quickly." The final phase used weapons that violated half a dozen galactic treaties on biological warfare. Viruses that turned the devourers' own regeneration systems against them, causing runaway cellular growth that consumed them from within. Genetic bombs that rewrote their DNA in real time, breaking down the molecular bonds that held their massive bodies together. Within 6 hours, the system was silent. 300 devourer organisms, ranging from small fighters to moon-sized behemoths, floated dead in space. Their bodies had been reduced to basic organic compounds that drifted in expanding clouds around the dying planet. "All targets neutralized," Martinez reported, but his voice was subdued. Everyone on the bridge had watched something that would haunt their dreams for years to come. Chen looked at the tactical display one final time, then turned to her communications officer. "Send a message to the Kethmori fleet. Tell them their 12th world is secured, and send a copy of our tactical data to Fleet Command. They'll want to start mass-producing these weapons immediately." Dr. Vance approached the Admiral quietly. "Ma'am, what we just did? The level of biological warfare we employed. It's going to change how every species in the galaxy sees us. We didn't just defeat the devourers, we tortured them to death." Chen looked out at the dead system, where fragments of consumed worlds mixed with the remains of creatures that had once seemed invincible. "Doctor, those things killed 47 billion beings on the last world alone. They've committed genocide on a scale that defies comprehension. If making them suffer before they die is what it takes to stop them, then that's what we'll do." She turned back to the bridge crew. The Kethmori asked for mercy. They didn't understand that sometimes mercy for the innocent requires being merciless to the guilty. "Today we sent a message to every would-be genocidal species in the galaxy. Humanity remembers those who prey on the defenseless, and we pay back cruelty with interest." As the human fleet prepared to jump to the next devourer-controlled system, the crew began to understand that they had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. They had become something that even their enemies would fear, and they were just getting started. 6 months after the first engagement, the galaxy had learned to fear the sound of human hyperspace signatures. Word spread through trade routes and diplomatic channels about the species that had turned biological warfare into an art form. The ones who hunted monsters by becoming something worse. Captain Marcus Torres stood on the bridge of the stealth ship Silent Death, studying sensor readings that made his blood run cold. His ship was designed for deep reconnaissance and surgical strikes, equipped with the most advanced biological weapons that human science could create. Today he was hunting devourer breeding grounds in the outer spiral. "Contact confirmed, Captain," reported Ensign Park. "Gas giant Kepler 442b shows massive biological activity. Spectral analysis indicates devourer larvae in various stages of development." Torres nodded grimly. Intelligence had been tracking devourer reproduction patterns for months, learning their life cycle with the methodical precision of exterminators studying vermin. The creatures used gas giants as nurseries, spawning millions of larvae in the dense atmospheric layers where they could feed on organic compounds and grow to maturity. "How many?" Torres asked. "Conservative estimate? 2 million larvae in various stages of development. If they reach maturity, they'll have enough biomass to strip 3 or 4 star systems." The captain opened a secure channel to Fleet Command. "Admiral Chen, this is Silent Death. We've located a major breeding facility. Requesting permission to deploy Genesis Protocol." The reply came back within minutes. "Permission granted, Captain. Send them to hell." Genesis Protocol was humanity's answer to the devourer reproductive cycle. Instead of trying to kill the larvae individually, human scientists had engineered a virus that would turn the nursery environment itself into a weapon. The virus would spread through the gas giant's atmosphere, converting the very compounds the larvae needed to survive into toxins that would dissolve them from within. "Deploy the packages," Torres ordered. "Full saturation spread." The Silent Death launched a dozen small probes into the gas giant's upper atmosphere. Each probe contained billions of engineered viruses designed to spread rapidly through the dense atmospheric layers. Within hours, the entire planet would become uninhabitable to devourer life forms. "Sir," Ensign Park said quietly, "we're receiving transmissions from the planet. The larvae, they're trying to communicate." Torres had been expecting this. As the virus spread, the dying larvae would release distress signals trying to warn other devourers of the attack. But human intelligence had learned to interpret these signals, and what they revealed was disturbing. "Put it through the translator," Torres said. The bridge filled with sounds that had no human equivalent, but the computer did its best to convert them into words. What came through was the sound of 2 million young creatures dying in agony, crying out for help that would never come. Some of the transmissions seemed to be asking why they were being killed. Others were calling for their parent organisms. "Jesus," whispered Dr. Hamilton, the ship's xenobiologist. "Captain, some of these larvae, they might not even be aggressive yet. They could be in a stage where they're just trying to survive and grow." Torres kept his expression neutral, but his hands tightened on the armrests of his command chair. "Doctor, those larvae will grow up to consume entire worlds. Every single one of them represents billions of future deaths. We're not murdering children, we're preventing a genocide that hasn't happened yet." The transmissions continued for 6 hours as the virus spread through the gas giant's atmosphere. By the end, the sounds had changed from confusion and fear to something that sounded disturbingly like rage. The dying larvae seemed to understand that they were being deliberately killed, and their final transmissions carried a promise of vengeance that made the human crew uncomfortable. "All biological activity has ceased," Park reported. "The nursery is completely sterilized. But Captain, we're detecting hyperspace signatures, multiple large contacts approaching fast." Torres felt a cold smile cross his face. "Adult devourers responding to the distress calls." "How many?" 15 confirmed contacts. They're big, sir. The largest is nearly 12 kilometers long. The devourers dropped out of hyperspace like avenging angels, their massive forms radiating fury that could be felt across subspace. They had arrived to find their offspring murdered and their nursery turned into a toxic wasteland. For the first time since the war began, humans were about to face devourers that were driven by something more than hunger. "They're angry," Dr. Hamilton observed unnecessarily. "The biosignatures are showing emotional responses we've never seen before. Grief, rage, something that might be hatred." Torres opened a channel to the fleet. "All ships, this is Silent Death. We have 15 angry parents incoming. Deploy the Orphan Maker packages and prepare for close engagement." The Orphan Maker was humanity's most psychological bioweapon. It was designed not just to kill devourers, but to make them experience the loss of their offspring before they died. The virus would hijack their neural pathways, forcing them to relive the deaths of every larva they had ever spawned, while their own bodies slowly dissolved. The battle was unlike anything the humans had fought before. The devourers attacked with a fury that transcended their usual calculated efficiency. They threw themselves at the human ships with suicidal determination, accepting massive damage to get close enough for their biological weapons to take effect. "They're not trying to win," Torres realized as he watched the tactical display. "They're trying to make us pay for what we did. They want revenge." The human response was swift and merciless. As the Orphan Maker virus took hold, the attacking devourers began to slow their assault. Their movements became erratic as they experienced the psychic feedback of watching their children die over and over again. Some of them began to emit sounds that could only be described as sobbing. "Contact the largest one," Torres ordered. "I want to send them a message." When the communication channel opened, Torres looked directly into the alien consciousness that had traveled across space to avenge its murdered offspring. "You came here looking for revenge," he said in a voice that carried no emotion. "You want to know why we killed your children? Because your species has proven that it cannot coexist with other forms of life. Every devourer that grows to maturity represents the death of billions of innocent beings." The response came back as a mixture of biological signals and subspace transmissions that the computers translated into something resembling words. "You are destroyers. You bring suffering. You are worse than us. Torres nodded slowly. Yes, we are. We're the species that specializes in making extinct things that threaten the innocent. Your children would have grown up to be monsters, so we made sure they didn't grow up at all. And now you're going to join them. The largest devourer made one final transmission before the virus completed its work. The translation was simple and terrifying. We were wrong about which species was the true plague. When the battle ended, 15 massive devourer corpses floated in space around the sterilized gas giant. The human fleet had suffered minimal casualties, but the psychological cost was evident in every face on every bridge. They had crossed another line, and they were beginning to understand that there might be no way back. Dr. Hamilton approached Captain Torres as the crew began cleanup operations. Sir, what we're doing, it's working, but we're becoming something that other species will fear for generations. We're not just stopping the devourers, we're traumatizing them before we kill them. Torres looked out at the aftermath of the battle and nodded slowly. Dr. The Kethmori came to us because they knew we were the kind of species that could do this job. They didn't want warriors who would fight clean. They wanted monsters who would fight dirty. Today we proved that humanity can be exactly as monstrous as we need to be to protect the innocent. As the Silent Death prepared to jump to the next target system, the crew began to understand that they were no longer fighting a war. They were conducting an extermination, and they were very, very good at it. The war ended not with a battle, but with silence. For the first time in 18 months, human sensor arrays detected no devourer life signs anywhere in the known galaxy. Every nursery had been sterilized, every adult hunted down and killed, every larva dissolved in its birthing pool. Humanity had achieved something that few species in galactic history had ever accomplished: the complete extinction of another sapient race. Admiral Chen stood in the observation deck of the flagship Retribution, looking out at a star system that had once housed billions of devourer organisms. Now it was empty except for the slowly dispersing clouds of organic compounds that had once been living creatures. The silence was absolute and final. "Final report, Admiral," Commander Martinez said as he approached with a data pad. "Confirmation from all sectors. No remaining devourer life signs detected. The species is extinct." Chen nodded slowly. "Casualties? Surprisingly low. We lost 43 ships and about 8,000 personnel over the course of the entire campaign. The bioweapons proved extremely effective once we learned how to deploy them properly. 8,000 human lives to end a species that had killed trillions. By any military standard, it was an overwhelming victory. But Chen found no satisfaction in the numbers. She had seen what her people had become during the war, and the cost of victory was written in the faces of every crew member who had participated in the extermination. "Ma'am," Martinez continued quietly, "we're receiving reports from the medical bays. Psychological evaluations show significant trauma among the crews. Many of them are having difficulty adjusting to what we did." Chen was not surprised. The weapons they had used, the tactics they had employed, the systematic nature of their extermination campaign had tested the limits of human morality. Captain Torres had returned from his final mission unable to speak for 3 days. Dr. Hamilton had requested reassignment to non-combat duties after suffering what could only be described as a nervous breakdown. Others simply stared into space with the hollow eyes of people who had seen too much. "Arrange for full psychological support for all personnel," Chen ordered, "and make sure they understand that what they did was necessary. The devourers were committing genocide on a galactic scale. We stopped them." But even as she said the words, Chen wondered if she believed them herself. Yes, they had stopped the devourers, but in doing so, they had become something that made other species whisper in fear when they thought humans weren't listening. The communication panel chimed, and Martinez activated the incoming transmission. Ambassador Veltar appeared on the screen, his alien features showing an emotion that might have been relief mixed with something that looked uncomfortably like horror. "Admiral Chen," Veltar began, his translated voice carrying undertones that the computer couldn't quite capture. "On behalf of the surviving Kethmori people, I must express our gratitude for what you have accomplished. Our remaining worlds are safe. Our refugees can begin to rebuild, and the nightmare that has haunted us for 5 years is finally over." Chen studied the alien ambassador's face. But Veltar hesitated before continuing. "We have been monitoring galactic communications, Admiral. Other species are concerned about humanity's methods, the level of biological warfare you employed, the systematic nature of your extermination campaign, the psychological tactics you used against the devourers. Many species are questioning whether you stopped a monster or simply became a more efficient one. And what do you think, Ambassador? Chen asked quietly. Veltar was quiet for a long moment. I think that my people asked for salvation and you provided it. But I also think that we may have unleashed something that the galaxy was not prepared for. Your species has shown that it can eliminate any threat no matter how powerful, with a ruthlessness that other civilizations find disturbing. Chen nodded slowly. The galaxy now knows that humanity exists, and that we respond to genocide with extermination. Perhaps that's not such a bad thing. How many other species like the Devourers are out there, Ambassador? How many potential threats will think twice before committing mass murder, now that they know what happened to the last ones who tried it? That is precisely what concerns other species, Veltar replied. You have appointed yourselves as the galaxy's executioners. Who decides which species deserves extinction? Who watches the watchers? Before Chen could respond, Martinez interrupted. Admiral, we're receiving priority communications from Earth. The President wants to speak with you immediately. The transmission from Earth brought news that Chen had been expecting, but dreading. President Williams appeared on screen with the tired expression of a leader who had been dealing with consequences she hadn't anticipated. Admiral, congratulations on your victory, Williams began, but we need to discuss the aftermath. We're receiving diplomatic protests from 17 different species about our conduct during the war. The Andromedan Council has formally censured humanity for violations of biological warfare treaties. The Centauri Federation is demanding oversight of our military capabilities. Chen felt a cold anger building in her chest. Madam President, where were these species when the Devourers were committing genocide? Where were their protests when entire civilizations were being consumed alive? That's not the point, Admiral. The point is that we've established ourselves as a species that other civilizations fear. Trade agreements are being canceled, diplomatic relations are being strained, and some species are discussing military alliances specifically designed to contain human expansion. Chen's expression hardened. So they're afraid of us, good. Maybe now they'll think twice before ignoring genocide in their own neighborhoods. Maybe they'll take responsibility for stopping the next species that decides other races don't deserve to exist. Admiral, you're missing the bigger picture. We're being isolated, treated as a pariah species. Is that really the position we want humanity to occupy in galactic politics? Chen looked out at the empty star system one more time before responding. Madam President, the Kethmori came to us because they knew what we were capable of. They didn't want diplomats or peacekeepers. They wanted killers who were willing to do what needed to be done. We saved an entire civilization and prevented future genocides by making an example of the Devourers. She paused, choosing her words carefully. If other species want to fear us for protecting the innocent, let them. If they want to isolate us for refusing to tolerate genocide, that's their choice. But they should remember that the next time a species like the Devourers appears, they might not be so lucky as to have humans willing to do the dirty work. The conversation ended with an understanding that humanity's role in the galaxy had fundamentally changed. They were no longer the newcomers seeking acceptance. They were the species that other civilizations called when diplomacy failed and extinction threatened, and the species they avoided when they wanted to sleep peacefully at night. As the human fleet prepared for the journey home, Chen stood once more in the observation deck. The stars looked different now, somehow more lonely and more dangerous. Humanity had proven that it could protect the innocent by destroying the guilty, but in doing so, they had become something that even their allies found disturbing. Dr. Vance approached the Admiral one final time. Ma'am, do you think we did the right thing? Chen considered the question for a long moment. Doctor, the right thing and the necessary thing aren't always the same. The Devourers killed trillions of innocent beings and would have killed trillions more. We stopped them in the only way that was guaranteed to work. Whether that makes us heroes or monsters depends on who you ask. And what do you think we are? Vance asked quietly. Chen's smile was sad and cold. We're what the galaxy needed us to be, Doctor. The Kethmori asked for mercy, but the universe sent them something better. It sent them justice, served by a species that understands that sometimes you have to become a monster to stop monsters. As the human fleet jumped to hyperspace, leaving behind a star system cleansed of the last traces of devourer existence. One fact became clear to every intelligence in the galaxy. Humanity had established itself as the immune system of civilized space. They would protect the innocent by any means necessary, and they would sleep soundly knowing that somewhere in the darkness, the predators were learning to fear the hunters. The age of mercy had ended. The age of humanity had begun,